Dzień dobry.
Good morning.
Jesteśmy bardzo szczęśliwi, że tutaj możemy być dzisiaj.
We're so happy that it's possible for us to be here today.
Dziękuję pastorze za zaproszenie
Thank you, Pastor, for your invitation
i za członkami.
and for the members.
Dziękuję dla nas naprawdę to jest honor i przywilej tutaj być.
And for us, it really is an honor and a privilege to be here.
Więc dziękujemy bardzo.
Thank you so much.
Od mojego serca, który teraz jestem Polakiem, dziękuję.
And from my heart, which really is now Polish, thank you.
And I do speak English. But I thought you might want to know what it will be like in heaven. Because when we get to heaven, we're all going to speak Polish. They say in Poland that Polish is the heavenly language because it takes an eternity to learn. And I believe them. But I don't think I don't think Polish is the heavenly language. I think it came from somewhere else. But it is a difficult language, and again, thank you from my heart. Thank you so much, Pastor and congregation, for the love that we've sensed here, the love we've seen from you guys, and coming to Poland to be part of us. That was a big thing. It really was. We had 16 projects when we started out, and you guys were part of that. Every dollar, every tear, every sacrifice, every prayer that you've sown into it has made a difference in Poland. So again, thank you. Thank you from my heart. And Laura, you can say a couple words, and yep, you speak loud.
Well, it is great to be back. I feel like it's like going home where Mom and Dad used to be. Our little granddaughter, Lily, who's 3 years old, is in the nursery or in the donut club. Hey, so you see a little blonde in a little polka, dress outfit. That's our little Lily. She's going to find you after service, and she's going to give you one of our prayer cards. So if you don't take one, she's going to find you. Because she loves people, meeting people, and she loves helping Grandpa and Grandma now raise our prayer support for Poland. So find her at the back table. If you don't see her, she'll find you. Pastor, it was a privilege to have you guys come and help us with one of our big projects in Bydgoszcz over the last 16 years. We finished 16 building projects. Number one was the Warsaw Seminary, and in that building today, in our chapel area, there are 4 churches meeting every Sunday. That's our main church plant. From our main church plant in Warsaw, the last 4 years, we have also planted 3 new church plants. One in Pultusk, which is an autonomous national pastor church. The other one was, thank you. Is that better? You'll find me. The other one is in Przasnysz. There we go. It takes 2 in Polish to make it work. We know all the Polish jokes. So we had Pultusk, Przasnysz, and pray for Przasnysz. We still need a national pastor and a place to meet there in Przasnysz. That work is struggling because we've been kicked out of every building we've been trying to rent in that city. The national Catholic priest finds out we're in the city, and he warns the people to have nothing to do with us because they believe we are a sect. So pray for Przasnysz. Our last church plant is in Płock, a city of 120,000 or 122,000 people. And we just, within the last month, we bought a building for that church to meet in. So God is doing great things. We have a lot more work to do ahead of us. But thanks for being a part of Poland and for a part of getting the gospel to the nation that needs so desperately to know what it is to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Our uniforms, everybody says, are you in the army? Well, God's army. This is the official uniform for the Polish National Hunting Association. And God has opened doors for us to work within that group as volunteers. So we are part of the Mazowiecki district. We work in the national offices twice a week as volunteers. And it's opened a great door of evangelism. And our hats are something that we wear as part of the uniform. And we've become signalists. On these hats are a lot of different, you'll see a lot of different pins. And we call them our prayer hats. These are all places where we've been invited all over Poland to participate in their traditions of hunting, and then we get to share the gospel. And Rich is going to tell you a whole bunch of cool things that God has done and just miracles of how God has opened new doors for us in Poland.
Thank you. I don't need this. No. I'll just lay this back here. Thank you again for allowing us to come, Pastor. It's really a privilege. I'm going to share a little bit, but Lori wants to thank you in a different way, a different kind of way. And one of the things that we do when we're playing as signalists is we actually guide the hunts, and we do this with music and different things. We actually tell the drivers when to move forward, sideways, backwards, all these different things. At the end, they always have a ceremony for the best hunter. And in this ceremony, they play a song called King of the Hunt. And so we want to play that for you today. Yeah, for King of the Hunt. Because this is, we want to play King of the Hunt, and just it's a way of saying thank you for what you've done for us, and what you've done for Poland, and what you've done for missionaries and missions around the world. So you are the King of the Hunt. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You know, if it wasn't for people like you, like yourselves, like this church, we wouldn't get to fulfill God's calling upon our life. And, you know, that means a lot to us. It really does. And thank you. You realize that church in Bydgoszcz, I just want to back up just a little bit. That church in Bydgoszcz had set dormant, that building project itself that you worked on had set dormant for 13 years before you guys came along. And really, before you and then a couple other teams that came in, I think there was one or two teams that came just before you, but that building sat dormant, and they didn't have the funds to finish it because in 1996, Poland they didn't change their złote, they still had the same złote, but they reduced their currency by 3 zeros. So if you had 1,000 złote, which is the Polish dollar, if you had 1,000 złote in the bank overnight, you had $1. And so what happened, these churches, there were a number of these churches that had raised their funds and they had started building, and all of a sudden overnight they were $1,000, times 1,000 less in their building funds. And so those churches literally sat dormant for 13 years until churches like Howell, churches like different ones that came over and helped us finish that project. And that church today runs about 300 people, and they've literally planted another church across town. And so thank you. And you don't understand. I just want you to really realize how thankful we are for you. Thank you for what you've done for Poland. A few years ago, oh, yes. Lori wants me to mention one more thing. We have two boys, Andy and Joshua, and those that were on the team know this. Joshua, our youngest boy, was deployed. He starts today. He registered today. He's deployed overseas. And so would you just add him to your prayer list when you're praying for people? He'll be there. He's with the Air Force, and he'll be there for about 6 months. And so just pray for Joshua, that God protects him and that he can be a witness to those around him. Thank you. Thank you. A few years ago, about 15 years ago now, Pastor, I'm getting older. Pastor stays young. I just get older. About 15 years ago, Lori and I wound up in a place called Springfield, Missouri. And we were in what they would call orientation and School of Missions. And while they were there, in a 3-week or 4-week period of time, they tried to cram everything there is about missions into my little pea brain. Now, how many of you know that when you get stuff coming and going through your mind and they have classes all the time, you don't remember everything? And there were a couple things that I just, for some reason, and I don't know why, but there was a couple of things that just stuck. And if you know me, it's always the dumbest things that stick in my mind. And one of the things that stuck in my mind was they told us that when we were speaking or when we were doing things to watch our hands, because hand gestures sometimes in foreign fields can be offensive. And this stuck in my mind, and I can remember the first time I spoke in one of the Polish churches, I grabbed the pulpit like this, and I held on for dear life, thinking that as I'm preaching, because I preach with my hands, you'll watch me today, you'll see me moving my hands. I was thinking, last thing I want to do is have some obscene gesture while I was preaching. And so I just grabbed that pulpit and just hung on. I know I was probably one of the stiffest preachers they'd ever see, because I just hung on. Well, while we were there, we had been there about 3 weeks or about a month, and we received the funds from Michigan for Speed the Light. And those of you who know what Speed the Light is, thank you for giving to Speed the Light. Thank you. We've had, actually in Poland, we've had 7 vehicles purchased by Speed the Light. And 2 of them have been our personal ones. We actually wore one completely out. We dropped that blue one. You remember the blue one? We dropped the drive shaft out of that one a couple years ago. And so we had to get a new one. But thank you, Speed the Light. So we're in this little blue van, and we're driving down the road across Poland, and we see these people doing this to us. And we're thinking, wow, these are the friendliest people in the world. They're waving at us. They don't even know us. And look, every time we go by a bus stop, every time we go by a corner on the street, somebody's waving at us. And so we said, let's just wave back at them. So we go down the road, and somebody would be doing this to us, and we just wave as we went by. Come to find out, they were hitchhiking. And instead of doing this in Poland, they do this to stop you. And so they're trying to wave us down to get us to get a ride, and we're going, hey, see you later. Another thing happened about the same time, maybe a little bit later. I was in the old town, and one of the laws in Poland is that when you come to a crosswalk, we call them zebras in Poland, but when you come to a crosswalk, as soon as a lady or a man step off the curb, you have to stop and give them the right of way. Even if you're right on the crosswalk when they step off, you have to stop. And so I was in the old city, and I'm driving probably about 25 miles an hour. And as I'm coming to a crosswalk, out of the corner of my eye, I see a lady do this and step off that corner onto that crosswalk. And so I slam on my brakes. And when I do, that bumper of my car is now about halfway across that crosswalk. And so the lady walks out. She gets to about where the middle of my car, and she looks at me, and she goes like this to me. And something rose up in me. I must have had a bad day. I looked at this lady, and I went, same to you, lady, back at you. Did the same motion to her. And then I found out later that what she was doing, that in Poland there's another law, that says that 24 hours a day, 365 and a quarter days a year, you have to drive with your lights on. And I had mine off, and she was simply telling me, turn your lights on. I had to repent later. Never could find the lady to ask for permission, or ask for her to tell her I was sorry. And so I bear that burden with me still today. So there are some signals, though. There are some hand gestures that are international. You agree? Sure. How many of you have ever seen this hand gesture? You know what it means? Surrender. Or if you're in the church, you can say, praising the Lord, right? Because when we praise the Lord, you know what we're doing? We're literally surrendering to God. And we're saying, God, I surrender to you. Have your way in my life. Do what you want to do. And then there's another hand gesture, and it looks like this. Stop. Stop. And in Poland, you'll see that a lot from the policemen because they don't chase you down with their cars. They just say, stop. It's a miracle what happens in that. As soon as that police officer sticks them hands out, it doesn't matter how fast those poles are going, they stop. There's just something about that signal or symbol or hand gesture, stop. And in our Christian life, a lot of times we have a decision to make when it comes to the things of God. When it comes to God working in our lives and doing things in our lives and we're going through difficult situations, we have 2 options. We can say, God, I surrender. God, you do what you want to do in me. God, I know I'm going through a hard time, but if this is your will and this is what you want to do with me, do it. Or else, we can say, stop. God, I can't take it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. God, I have to stop right now because I can't go any farther. It's our decision. I believe with all my heart that God has chosen each one of us to do something special in us. If you ever have a chance to go to a place called Tehran, Iran, has anybody ever been there? If you ever get a chance to go there, one place that you should go to is a place called the Palace of the Kings. When they were building this building a few years ago, they wanted to make this building the most beautiful building. They wanted to make it like the 8th wonder of the world. They wanted to make it the most beautiful building in the world. So they went to France or sent their ambassador to France, and they ordered these special mirrors because at that time France was one of the leading countries in developing mirrors and different things, artifacts, and you know how beautiful those old things, palaces in France were. And so they went to France, they ordered these mirrors, and they were expecting them to come in. And they waited a few months or weeks for them to come. And when they arrived, they opened the crates, and they were all joyous because they're going to finish this palace and put these mirrors inside. And when they opened those crates, every one of those mirrors was broken. And they looked at each other and they said, man, we just wasted all this money. Our hopes are gone. Our building won't be beautiful now because our money's been spent and from our budget. And what are we going to do now? And some engineer or some designer came up with an idea to take those mirror fragments, those pieces of broken glass, basically, and he did this with them. He reshaped shards of mirror and turned it into this palace that you're going to see right here. And let's see if I can point that in the right direction. Go ahead and flip the next one. I can't seem to get it to work. People literally, when they go there and do not know this story, when they go to this palace, they look up at the ceilings, they look at the walls, and they think, man, look at, there's rubies and there's diamonds and there's all these special stones there. Go ahead and flip the next one for me. And they go away thinking that, wow, this place is full of just all kinds of precious jewels, when all that is broken glass. Think about that the next time when God is doing something in your life and you feel broken and you feel hurt and you feel like the circumstances are overwhelming you. You know what? God is the master builder. And sometimes it takes God to break us and to remold us, to make us into something that looks like this. You know, David said this. He says, God, before I was born, you knew me. Before I was in the mother's womb, you knew me. And basically what he was saying was this: before I was a sparkle in my mom and dad's eyes, God, you knew me. He says, David goes on to say, I am wonderfully made. And then he says this, and this has always been peculiar. I've always thought this. He says, every day of my life was written in your book. Think about that when it comes to the designer. You were born with a purpose. I believe with all my heart that everyone in this room, everyone in the world, God has, before you were born, God knew you. God laid a special purpose upon your life, and you were born for a reason. Jeremiah the prophet said it this way. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, God is speaking to Jeremiah, and he says, Jeremiah, before you were born, I knew you, and I called you to be a prophet to the nations. Think about that. In Isaiah chapter 45, there's a man by the name of Cyrus who was mentioned. And in this chapter of Isaiah, God talks about this man named Cyrus who would in the future deliver Israel from its bondage in Babylon and Persia. Cyrus was born 150 plus years after that prophecy. God knew Cyrus before he was born. He wrote that in his book. Think about Ephesians. Ephesians, the New Testament goes a little bit further. Ephesians says this. It says, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. And usually we stop right there, right? Verse 10. We are God's workmanship. If you translate that from the Greek, it says masterpiece. We're the masterpiece of God. Created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which the Father planned before the foundation of the world. Think about that. Before God said, in the beginning, before God said, let there be light, God knew you. He wrote you in his book. You have a special purpose in the life of God, in the life of the kingdom of God. Now think about this. Today in Sunday school class, you're talking about DNA. Right? In Sunday school class, he's talking about DNA and how that DNA is information. And he basically said, and the Word breathed life into the DNA, right? Think about this. The Bible says that you are the image of God. And when God breathed his life into you, he did it for a purpose, for a reason, because he had already written you in the book. And what God is doing is he's fashioning you now to fulfill the purpose that He has for you. And it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter your nationality, it doesn't matter your culture. God knows you, and God wants the best for you, and God has a plan for you in His kingdom. And Mark Twain, show the next slide, and Mark Twain said it this way: the two most important days of your life are, number one, the day that you were born, and the day you find out why. The day you find out why. I want to tell you my story. And I'm not telling you my story because it's something great or grand or anything like that. I want to tell you my story because if God can do this for me, just think what He can do for you. In 1967, my father had been commissioned to go to Mexico as a missionary. We were in his commissioning service, and I was about 6 or 7 years of age. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, because they sang a little chorus that went something like this. I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord, o'er mountain or plain or sea. I'll say what you want me to say, dear Lord. I'll be what you want me to be. Anybody hear that before? A couple of you. I sang that song, and for one of the first times in my life, I began to cry. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I didn't know why. I was in a church service, and I was just crying. I couldn't stop crying. So my family and I, we took off for Mexico. And we were there approximately 6 years. And while we were there, I learned to speak Spanish. And I learned to speak it so fluently that I was actually the interpreter for the teams that came into Mexico. And so teams would come in, and I would interpret for them, and it became my life. I used to love that. You know, for one thing, as a kid, you get a little tension, you know. But I used to love that. And after 6 years of being on the field, we suddenly came back because my sister got sick. And I remember going into a small school in a place called Camden, Michigan, an American school for the first time in 6 years. And I remember feeling out of place. I felt like a nerd, you know. I mean, I wasn't a nerd, but I felt like you know how nerds sometimes they feel like they're on the outside. I dressed differently. I had a real heavy accent, like a Mexican accent. I dressed differently. My culture was different. I acted differently. I couldn't play basketball or baseball like the other kids. I could play soccer. I couldn't do anything with my hands. I could do it all with my feet, you know. And as a matter of fact, my teachers at the age of 13 wanted to put me in speech therapy because my accent was so bad. I had like a lisp, they thought, because I would speak a little bit like this. Because in Veracruz, they didn't say Veracruz, they said Veracruz. And so they wanted to put me. Now, how many of you know that as a kid of 13 years of age, the last thing that you want to do is be singled out? And so I felt out of place. I really did. And I remember praying to God a number of times and say, God, take me back to Mexico. I want to go back to Mexico. I really love those people there. I want to go back. And it didn't happen. So in 1976, I went to a youth rally in a place called Sturgis, Michigan. I don't remember what the pastor was preaching, but I ran to the altar because I wanted to get things straight with God as far as, what am I doing here on earth, God? What's your purpose for me? I want to know what I'm to be. And as I ran to those altars, I began to pour out my heart before God. God says to me, I'm calling you, this is 1976, to be a missionary behind the Iron Curtain in one of those countries of the former Soviet Union. I was so excited. I thought, Pastor, I was going to go the next day. You know how kids are. God tells you something, man, you're ready to go. And I remember going back to my parents and going back to my friends and going back to my youth pastor and saying, God has just called me to a place in the Soviet Union. And they all looked at me in disbelief and they said, must have been what you ate last night. They all said, you know, you'll never be able to go. They're communists over there. They're atheists. They don't want missionaries. You'll never be able to go. So I tucked it in the back of my head. I went to school in a little school called Ferris State University where I studied nuclear physics, nuclear medicine. I ended up trying to get my master's in I wanted to become a health physicist and tried to get my master's from Wisconsin University. And in the process, in 1989, I was youth pastoring in St. Louis, Michigan. I saw a man on television take out this hammer and begin to strike this wall. And as the pieces fell off that wall, and as the people rushed across the border from East Germany to West Germany, I remember God saying, I'm doing this to remind you of your calling. So I went back to Bible school. I took the 10-year program. I had a family. I was working as a youth pastor. I was working another job, and it just took me forever, it seemed. And I went through the 10-year program. In 1999, I finally received my ordination. I was pastoring in a little town called Bad Axe, Michigan, and Jason can tell you about that. He was there to help us in a building program. And I was pastoring in Bad Axe, Michigan, this little town, and a friend of mine calls me up. My wife and I had been going on missions trips almost every summer for a couple of weeks behind the Iron Curtain to see where God had called us, and we went to a number of places and never felt the call to any of those places. In 1999, a friend of mine calls me up and says, Richard, I'm taking a team to Poland. Would you like to go with us? And I said, no, I don't want to go. There's just a bunch of Polacks there. And I wasn't trying to be derogatory because Polak simply means male, like a man in Polish language. I ended up going on the trip. I get off the airplane. I start crying. For 14 days, I cry the whole time, and God says to me, this is where I called you to in 1976. So I go home and I tell my wife, and she's excited. No, she's not. Why Poland? Why now? Things are just starting to go together for us here in this church. We just finished our building program. All these questions came up, So to make a long story short, in 2002, we got off the plane, April 25th of 2002. We got off the plane, and we were in Poland, and we've been there for 15 years. And I believe with all my heart, God had it written in his book. I told people a while back that I felt like Abraham, because from the year that he called me to the year that we got there was 25 years. Wow. The promise that he gave about his son. So the first 9 years went pretty good. I wish I could say every year went great. First 9 years, pretty decent. We worked on 16 building projects. We started a church plant there in the Bible school. Things were going okay. They weren't keeping me busy enough, I thought, after the projects were done, So I went to the national church. This was after our second term, about 6 months before we were ready to come home to visit you guys again. I went to the national church, and I asked the national church, what are we going to do with us when we come back? What do we tell the churches that we're going to do when we come back? And they looked at me, and the national church said, we don't know. We've never had a missionary stay as long as you. Most Assemblies of God missionaries in Poland have only lasted 3 years. So they said to me, they looked at me and they said, well, why don't you just go back home and send us the money? Yeah, that's what they said. And I thought, and here's my thinking. I told Laura, I said, they don't want us anymore. I mean, I know that's probably not, they just didn't know what to do with us. But my thought was, they don't want me. So I became discouraged. And so I went home to the apartment, and about a week later, or 2 weeks later, we got 6 months to go now in our term. About 2 weeks later, our landlord comes up to us and says, we've been renting the same apartment now for 9 years. Think about this. The landlord comes up to us and says, you need to move. Just out of the blue. You need to move. I need this apartment now. I have a new child, and she needs this bigger apartment. I have a smaller apartment. We're living in it, but now we need the big one. And so now the national office doesn't want me. Now my landlord doesn't want me. What do we do? She says, I'll give you 1 month to move. Now, we had received permanent residency a couple years before. And with permanent residency, they have to know where we are. And so we have to have a house, an apartment, and we have to have a contract, like a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract with that in order to stay in Poland. And we were leaving in about 6 months to come back to the States, and I did not want to have a 2-year contract if the national church didn't want me. Because that means I wouldn't be going back, and why would I have to pay for 2 more years? You understand what I'm saying? And to try to find someone that would rent to me on a month-by-month basis and still give me a contract was impossible. So for 3 weeks, we kept looking for someone that would rent to us on a month-by-month basis and still give me a contract so I could show it to the government. It didn't happen for 3 weeks. And then we found this little old lady. And she agreed to a contract on a month-by-month basis and would give me a contract that would qualify me to stay on my permanent residency. So we go to her house, I sign the contract, I give it back to her, and she looks at me and she says, this apartment or this house, as part of this house that you're renting, she says, has been vacant for over a year. I've been trying to rent it, and I can't rent it. So 3 weeks ago, the same time we're getting kicked out of our apartment, she says, 3 weeks ago I went to my astrologer. And I asked my astrologer when I would rent this apartment. And the astrologer said this, when the Americans come, you will rent it. I felt the hair on the back of my head stand up. And I looked at Lori and I said, Lori, you better grab a gallon of oil and anoint this place because it might be full of demons. And I was joking. But here's what I thought, First, the national church doesn't want us. That's bad. And then it went to worse when our own landlord didn't want us after being there for 9 years. And now I've signed a contract with the devil. That's how I felt. To make a long story short, I'm going to step down here because I dropped this on the way up. To make a long story short, in 2 weeks, this lady, suddenly our apartment, her name is Marilka, our manager of our apartment, the owner of our apartment, comes to our church 2 weeks without an invitation. She knew we went to church. She shows up without an invitation. I was afraid to have the demon come into our church. That's what I'm thinking. She shows up at our church and she gives her heart to the Lord Jesus Christ. Now she's like family to us. We get to go to all of her Easters with her kids and Christmases with her kids. We're family. Part of the family of God, but really part of her family. So as we were getting ready to go, after that 6 months passed, and we were getting ready to come back to America on furlough, last time, she presents me with this. She said, Richard, this is my heart. She says, when you go back to America and you go to those churches and you talk to them about what's happening in Poland, you tell them about me. And you thank them for sending missionaries to Poland so that I could learn to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. So today I present you the heart of Marilka. And from my Polish heart, I want you to understand, I really mean it when I say thank you for sending us. One of these days when you're in heaven, Marilka is going to walk up to you. And if you know me, if you know Marilka like I know Marilka, you're going to end up with lipstick smeared from this side of your face to this side of your face, where she kisses you and thanks you for giving and praying for missionaries, not only in Poland, but around the world. Thank you. Thank you. Now, do you want to hear the rest of the story? Now I'm going to share the story of miracles. When we came home on the field, or came home on furlough from the field, we decided that we were going to continue, even though we didn't know what to do, because we weren't sure we were going to go back to Poland. And I had talked to our supervisors and our directors down in Springfield, and they had come up with some suggestions that maybe we go to Spain or we go to a Spanish-speaking country because I spoke Spanish. And every time we prayed about it, we just didn't feel led. And so we decided that since we didn't know what God was doing or what was going to happen in the future, we were just going to stay put and continue to raise the money to go back to Poland. And if God changed or he opened another door, we would step into that door joyfully, but we didn't want to change ground because you never shut something before God tells you to. Amen. So we began to pray about it. And one of my prayers just before I left the field was this, and I'm going to go back just to give you a little background. See, I was a hunter since 1974. The day I shot my first pheasant, I was hooked. And I tell you what, I was hooked. I hunted every season. You can ask Lori. I hunted every season there was. I hunted for everything here in Michigan as often as I could, whenever I could. I'd take my vacation time and go hunting and leave Lori at home. It became a second passion behind Jesus. Lori, at the age of 30, had to take hunter's safety with these little kids because she wanted to spend vacation with Dad and the boys. And she's become a great hunter since then. So it became my passion. And so I had given it up for the first 9 or 10 years of being in Poland. And when we were getting ready to go back to Poland, I simply said a prayer. I said, God, I'll go where you want me to go. I'll be what you want me to be. I'll do what you want me to do. But God, I've given up hope. I've given up hunting, and I would sure like to hunt again wherever you send me. We get on a plane. I had been told for years, for about 10 years before that, I had been told that I will never be able to hunt in Poland unless I pay $10,000 to $15,000 for one hunt with an outfitter. And that's not in my missionary budget to come up with that kind of money. It's not that, as a matter of fact, Springfield, if I would have told them, they had laughed me off the field. So we go back to Poland. We get back to Poland, and 1 week out of the blue, after me praying that prayer, getting back to Poland, Marilka, our landlord's, her stepbrother shows up out of the blue at our house. He works for the Ministry of Environment, and he says, Richard, I made an appointment while you were overseas, while you were back home, or back in America. I've made an appointment for you to meet the headhunter, not the headhunter, but the headhunter of Poland. He says, we're going to see if we can get you to be ability to hunt. We go into his office. The first question he asked me, are you a citizen in Poland? I said, no, sir. He says, He says, do you have permanent residency? I said, yes, sir. We didn't know why about 5 years before we had received permanent residency when none of the other missionaries from the Assemblies of God had ever received it. It was a miracle. And if you have time, I don't have enough time today, but I have to tell you the steps we had to go through to get it. And it was just literally a miracle of God. One of the chief inspectors in the thing finally signed off on it, just out of the blue. So we had permanent residency. He says, then you can be a hunter if you'll take this course. So I had to go to the Army Institute because the hunters are considered the militia of Poland. I had to go to the Hunting Institute. And while I was at the Hunting Institute there, I had to take a semester course, college-level course, on how to be a hunter, where I learned the biology of the animals. I learned all different things that you'd never learn in America because over there it's a VIP thing. Then I had to take 5 exams. The first one was a written exam in Polish. I scored a 93% on it. That was God. Literally a miracle of God. I had to stand before that commission of all those headhunters, and they quizzed me back and forth, different questions. I answered them. They passed me. I took a shooting test. That was the easiest one. I passed it because I'd been shooting all my life. Passed it. Took a physical exam. The doctor stamped all my documents. I had one exam to go, and I was really worried about it, a psychological exam. In Polish. I passed it, so I must really be a Polak. So they gave me my license, and it's not really a license, it's actually a membership into the Polish Hunting Association. It's a completely different entity there than here. So I received this license to become a Polish hunter, but I haven't got my license to carry a gun, and Poland doesn't have a Second Amendment, and foreigners do not carry guns in Poland. And as a matter of fact, from the very start, they told me chances are I could become a hunter, but I'd never get to hunt or shoot, because I'd never own a gun. To make a long story short, the week before I had to turn my paperwork, because they give you a deadline to turn all your paperwork, I had to turn it into the commandant of the city police. And the week before, I met a man who said, he said, did you get your paperwork turned in? I said, no, sir, I've got one document I'm having problems figuring out because we go by feet per second here and they go by joules when it comes to hunting animals. And I understand joules, but I didn't understand the context as far as what we needed for guns. And so he says, don't worry about it. He says, I'm going to send you a template. You just put your name on it, and it'll tell them what guns you need to go hunting. So he sends it to me, and by the way, he says, I know I'm a friend of the commandant of the police who issues the rights to have a gun. Now, who sets up those kind of meetings? God. So I go with my paperwork all filled out. I go into the police station. There's a little blonde at the front desk. I hand her the paperwork, and I told her I want to apply for a hunting gun, and she says, where are you from? She noticed I had an accent. I said, America, and she looks at me, she says, and you want to get a gun? And then she says, if, and it wasn't a little if, it was if you get a gun, it's going to take you 3 months to get a permission to have it. You'll get a letter in the mail. It'll be written permission. So I go back home. I thank her. I go back home. And 3 weeks, not 3 months later, 3 weeks later, I have permission not for a gun, but for 10 guns in Poland. Who does this? God does this. I go back to the blonde and tell her that I got my permission in 3 weeks, and I show her my permission. She says, "How did you get this so quickly?" My friends who graduated the same time I did, took them 3 and 4 months to get theirs. So now I'm a hunter in Poland. I get to go hunting. I get to hunt those red deer, those big stags. I get to hunt pigs. I get to hunt all these different animals. Meanwhile, I find out that they have traditional hunting in Poland, and they play horns, like this one or like the little one that Lori played. And I don't play an instrument. I never played an instrument before, and so, but Lori had been a trumpet major in high school and in college. She played trumpet, and she'd been a music major. And so I told Lori about this. I said, "Lori, you need to take a course. They have a course for signaling. You can become a signalist. We can still hunt together. I'll hunt, and you can signal." So she says, "Okay." So she takes the course. She'd given up, that was her passion, and she'd given it up for about 30 years while we had children, while we were going to the mission field, while we were pastoring. She'd given up the horn, and it was her passion before, and so she picks it up, and she starts signaling, and people start saying, "Wow, she's good at this." They're starting to invite her to be part of bands. They're starting to invite her to the radio to play with the top 90 signalists in all of Poland. They're putting her on television. They're putting her on magazines. And we go to this expo, and everybody's coming to her and shaking her hand and saying, "Hi, Lori." And I said, "Who is that?" She says, "I don't know. They just know me from the hunting magazines." And finally, I get jealous. And I said, "Lori, do you think you could teach me how to play one of those horns?" And she says, "Well." I mean, I was 53 years old. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? So I sat down, and she began to teach me. And we begin to go all over Poland where we're invited to play at hunting clubs where they have 50th anniversaries or 60th anniversaries. We joined the Mazowiecki province. Their state thing is a volunteer, where twice a week we're meeting in the national offices. We've joined the group that plays now across the nation. So when there's a festivity in one of the hunting clubs, we get invited. And then when we're invited, we're able to share the gospel with all these hunters. The group that we're ministering to, they're now our ministry group. There's like 14 of them in this group, and we minister to them every time we're with them. We have invited to funerals, hunters' funerals, and sometimes they'll ask for the Americans, because we're the first Americans to ever to learn their language and accept their traditions and to do their traditions. And we have been invited to more than one funeral. I mean, we've been invited to about, hundreds of funerals probably, but we've been invited to more than one funeral, 2 or 3 or 4 funerals, simply because we're Americans. And when we go there, we share the signals that they want us to play for the hunter's funeral, and then we share the gospel with the family who's hurting. We've got hunting clubs now that call me their priest. And as a matter of fact, they know that I'm not a Catholic. They know that I'm a Protestant, but they call me their priest. And before a hunt, they have a major hunt, like a duck hunt or a pheasant hunt or some major hunt. They'll ask me to come in and share a word with them and pray for them before they go out and hunt. So I get to share the gospel before we go hunting. There's a hunting club in a place called Wionczemien that calls me their pastor. And they want me to start a Sunday morning church service for the hunters. And this is happening all over and over and over. We've only been doing this for 3.5 years, and now we average about 1,000 to 1,200 hunters a year that we're ministering to into their personal lives. What I'm trying to tell you is this. Before I was born, God wrote me in the book. In 1974, He gave me a passion for hunting. In 1982, He gave me a wife who had a passion for playing the horn. In 1999, He sent me to Poland. In 2002, Lori joined us, and we went there full time. And we were there 9 years or 10 years, and then God says, "I'm going to bring my plan to fruition, and now you get to minister to 120,000 hunters and their family who have the same passion that you do."
That's awesome.
Where before, when we were in Poland, we wanted to minister to people because we were considered a sect, because we weren't Catholics. We were considered to be Polish is to be Catholic, and we were considered as a sect. They now accept me. And there are hunting club. There's one hunting club where not last Christmas, but the Christmas before, I was invited to go, and they invited me before they invited their own priest. And then they asked me for permission to invite their priest. God is beginning to turn the world upside down, just like He did in Acts, the book of Acts, where He said, "These are the men that turn the world upside down." Why am I sharing this with you? Because I want you to know that if you will turn your life and your passions over to Christ, God will use you to build His kingdom. God will do the miracles that you seek in your life. God will change you. He will change your families. He will change those around you. All you have to do is be willing to say, "God, I surrender to you. I surrender, God." That's right. I want to close with a story, Pastor. I'm sorry I'm going a little late. There was a lady by the name of Brenda. Oh, before I tell you the story, I want you to say this with me. This is a true story. I want you to mean it. This is a true story. Because you're not going to believe it when I tell you this story. It's a true story. A lady by the name of Brenda had some friends who were, I don't know, you call them mountain climbers or rock climbers. And they used to go out climbing rocks, and she wanted to be part of her friends. And I believe that the reason behind that was she wanted to win them to the Lord because she was a Christian. And how many of you know, like me with hunting, I can talk to hunters a lot better than I can talk to some people in Poland because we just relate. And so she went out and she studied and learned how to rock climb. She practiced and got ready. She learned how to belay. She learned about carabiners. She learned about the ropes, the safety stuff. Learned all of that so she could be with her friends. And after the time when she thought was proper, she said, "Okay, I'm going to go out with my friends and going to go rock climbing." So they go out to like a moderate to a medium, type of rock climb. And she gets up about 200 feet above the ground. And when she's up there, suddenly the safety strap slaps back and slaps her in the face and knocks her contact out. Now, if you wear glasses, you know that if one eye is gone, if you haven't got your contact in one eye, it just throws you off a little bit. I know that I've broken lens in my glass before. And now she's hanging 200 feet above the ground, and she's got one eye, basically. And so she's looking in her clothing, see if maybe it flipped back at her clothing, or she flipped back into the crevices of the rocks, and she's looking for that contact but does not find it. So she proceeds to climb. She gets to the top of the mountain or the rock that she's climbing, and she looks at her friends and she says, "Would you pray with me? Because I've lost my contact. I'm a little bit worried about, being up there this high without both eyes." So they sit down and they pray to find that contact, and they don't find it. So they slowly proceed back down the mountain. They get to the base of the mountain, and as they're at the base of the mountain, they're walking towards their vehicles, and another group is headed towards them, and someone yells out from this other group, "Hey, did someone here lose a contact?" Remember, she was 200 feet above the ground. I've been on a basketball court before. The guys that have lost them couldn't find them. They just disappear for some reason. And she looks at this group and says, "Where did you find my contact?" And they said, "We didn't find it." They said, "We were walking from our cars, and as we stepped from our cars to walk up towards the mountain, we saw this ant coming along, and it had something on its back. And so one of us reached down, and we picked it up, and it was a contact lens." Now you know why I said this is a true story, right? Brenda's father was a cartoonist. He's a cartoonist. And he wrote this cartoon that you're going to see on the board. "Lord, I don't know why you want me to carry this thing. I can't eat it. It's awfully heavy. But if this is what you want me to do, I'll carry it for you." Think about that. Brenda's 200 feet above the ground. She loses a contract. She gets to the top of the mountain and prays with her friends, probably because she wants to lead them to the Lord. And she's thinking there's a miracle going to happen, that she'll find this contact. She prays, nothing happens. And so God takes and sees this little ant crawling along the ground and says, "Hey, pick that up." You think it doesn't happen? What about in the Bible when God talks about Balaam? Balaam has been offered money to go say some evil things against Israel. And you know what? God talks to that donkey and says, "You better tell him not to go. I'm going to split his wig." What about Jesus? It said that he rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday on a donkey's colt that had never been ridden before. Now, have you ever tried to ride a horse that's never been ridden before? You don't do that. And yet that donkey's colt that had never been ridden before just went calmly in there. Because they were obedient to their Creator, to their master planner. Think about this in your life. How much more are you than the sparrow? How much more are you than the lily that grows on the ground? How much more are you that God has written your name in His book? God has written your future in His book. And all you have to do is say, God, I surrender to your plan. I surrender to you. And just think, if God can use me to minister among hunters in Poland, what can He do with your lives? You can change Howell. You can change Michigan. You can change the United States. You, through your faithfulness, can change the world if you find the purpose that God has for you. I'm going to ask Lori to come up in closing. How many of you remember the story of Peter's calling in the Bible? He's down by the seashore and he's washing his nets, or he's cleaning his nets. They'd just been out fishing. They didn't catch anything. And Jesus actually literally took them back out. And they caught some fish and then He brought them back in. And they're cleaning their nets. And Jesus looks at Peter and He says, you are a great fisherman. He says, but I'm going to make something better out of your life. Because I'm going to teach you how to catch men. In the Polish Bible, that word catch is the word łowić. To catch. Łowić. Say łowić. Very good. You guys come to Poland. He literally told Peter in this Bible that he would no longer catch men, but he would no longer catch fish, but he would catch men. Here's the cool thing. In Polish, the word to łowić ryby is the same as to łowię zwierzynę, which means the same word that they use to catch fish is the same word we use to catch animals. So the calling that God placed upon Peter is the same calling that He's placed upon Lori and I to catch men, which is the same calling that He's placed upon all of you. You have been called by God. Your ultimate purpose, you may do it through your passions, you may do it in different ways than we do it, but your calling is to catch men for the kingdom of God.